Lazy rolling. In theory, sounds like it should be one of the easiest exercises you can be given. In practice, it can be quite confusing and feel a little bit weird to really try and sort of put the pieces together. But effectively, our intent with this movement is to put ourselves in a position where the demands are extremely low and we're trying to teach ourselves how to move with as little effort as possible. We want to sort of let everything relax and melt down into the ground and effectively let whatever sort of impulse or momentum that we generate sort of create this continuous sort of passive or almost passive type of motion. We'll be right side down in this case. In terms of setup, we want to make sure that we've got our head well supported. And most likely to begin with, we'll use objects between our limbs to try and sort of help create either the space that we need or just to help induce the movement that we're looking for. And then as we progress in terms of the movement capacity that we have, we'll tend to bring ourselves narrower and narrower in terms of the support between us. Some things to focus on or things to be aware of in terms of the movement itself. This will make sense once you sort of see the movement in place, but we'll introduce this type of stuff now. I want you to be aware of some bony contacts on your thigh, on the downside thigh. You've got something, if we sort of use the midpoint of our femur or thigh as a way to start. If I roll up the outside of that thigh, I'll find at the top there's a big bony protuberance there that's referred to as your trochanter. That is one bony contact that I want you to be aware of. And if I roll down the outside down towards my knee, there'll be another bony protuberance there. That's your lateral femoral condyle. That's the other one that we want to be aware of. We want to make sure that as we're going through this rolling action, I always have pressure or contact with those 2 points. It will shift. At one point it'll be heavier on one side and heavier versus the other and vice versa. But they become the buffer zones in terms of how far I move as I go through this exercise. As soon as I start to feel one coming away from the ground or that I'm going to lose contact with, it just means that I shift my movement and I go the other way. I'm going to use a couple of props with this. So I've got my head support, my pillow. I want to make sure that that just sort of keeps my head in a nice, I don't want to use the word neutral, but just effectively I'm not too side bent one way or too side bent the other. I've just got things sort of sitting straight on top of each other. I'm going to use a peanut stability ball to begin with. You get your hands on one of these. This is really good from an introductory standpoint. So we're going to prop ourselves down on our right hand side, head nice and supported. I've got the peanut between my knees and between my arms. And the first thing that I want to do once I'm here is really sort of get myself in a sense of feeling as if I'm melting in the ground. And I find that the best way to do this is to do the opposite action of what you're trying to achieve. So we are trying to create a melting and relaxing type sensation. If we do the opposite, which is to squeeze everything as tight as you can, you'll find that you lose contact with the ground, that you've become pointy and pokey. And so effectively, you're aware of what we're not trying to do now. And so doing the very opposite, you'll start to feel yourself melt into the ground. And we're really trying to encourage that behavior. Arms and legs nice and floppy and heavy. Knees are just below hip height. And effectively from here, all I'm trying to do now is move or drag. Drag's a good way to think about this. Drag the object towards me and effectively drag it away from me with using as little effort as I can. The breathing itself is only going to be in through the nose and out through the nose. And again, I'm using those bony contacts we referred to before on the thighs as my indication of how far I go. Now, as you can see, the movement itself is extremely slow. And it's not really that big at all. But I am just trying to sort of keep myself nice and relaxed and heavy. Now when I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I maintain this feeling of heaviness on the ground. And at some point through this little tutorial, we'll talk through the ideas of creating sort of biases as to where motion begins. And that's where we can start to focus more of the behavior or action that we're trying to create. But to begin with, it's just these nice, easy movements back and forth. In turn, one of the big things to really try and get used to as you're going through this, particularly on the pullback, if I was to suggest as I come back that I'm trying to sort of emphasize more of that through my arm,
I want to feel as if it's my spine turning between my shoulder blades as opposed to my arm pulling me back. So if you think of your shoulder blades, they're not actually attached to the rib cage at the back. They effectively float in space. So I've got capacity for that rib cage to actually roll inside of that shoulder blade. And so what I want to think is, as I'm pulling back, I'm actually trying to turn my spine and have my arm just drag along the way. Now, as we become comfortable and proficient at using something like the peanut ball, if you do have access to, that's when we go to sort of more of our narrow props. That's where something like a foam roller becomes handy. And look, if you don't have a peanut ball, that's okay. You can jump straight to the foam roller. It does the same thing. It's round, it helps. It's just a little bit more narrow. So depending on the range of motion that you do have access to, that sort of depends on the size of the object that we need to use. So in this case, I'm going to get my right arm under the way because my foam roller is not very long. I'm going to work through the same sort of idea here, but by using a short roller, I can now start to try and generate some biases as to where the motion occurs from. So in this case, what I'm going to start to create is a leg lead on the way back and an arm sort of following along, and an arm lead on the way forwards with the leg delay. So when I do this, there is a certain amount of sort of slack in the system that, effectively I can start to bias motions more in one direction, one part versus the other, without creating any tension in the system, and just have it drag along. So if I sort of do a leg lead going back, how that's going to look is that I'm going to sort of slowly and heavily try and drag the foam roller back. And at this point, I start to feel a sense of stretch where if I was to go any further, I'm going to actually have to sort of really induce some effort through that movement. So it's at this point that the arm will just come along for the ride. And as it plays catch up, I'm still sort of trying to really encourage that idea here where my pelvis won't go any further, but my arm's got some range to go. I'm trying to induce that by that spinal turn that we were talking about before. So rather than pulling the arm back, I'm going to turn the spine to finish that drag off. And going the other way, I'm then going to try and let my arm really fall forwards, and that's going to start to create a sense of stretch between my shoulder blade. So now my spine will start to turn as I go forward. And now as I continue to go forwards, again, I can't go any further without effort now because my pelvis is dragging along too far, and that's where my pelvis will start to come along for the ride. So we can induce this idea of a delay or sort of independence of motion between pelvis and upper back. I can do the same with my head and my upper back as well. So if I focus on where I feel contact through my head, if I was to focus on the idea that as I'm lying down, I am able to create a pressure through the outside of my forehead, I want to hold on to that now, rather than letting my head come along for the motion. If I just stay heavy through those parts of the motion, I can start to create an exaggeration of some of the motions up here. So if I get floppy and heavy, and now I keep my eyes fixated on something in front of me as well, and I go through that motion, I can start to encourage, more emphasis of the motion coming through my upper back. So now I'm sort of playing with all three. So I can do leg lead, arm needs to come along, and again, if I keep going, my head wants to start to go, but I'm just going to stay heavy there. So now I'm encouraging more of that action here. So it just moves segmentally up the system, and the reverse of. So now I can let my eyes start to fixate on something, then my arm can go, spine comes along, pelvis comes along. But the intent with all of that again is that the foundation is the boundaries that we can move within, the heaviness and the ease of which we're trying to move with. As we add complexity to it, we want to make sure that those foundational behaviors stay.